They say Stagecoach Mary stood over 6 feet tall and feared no one but God. She worked hard, she drank hard, and if the situation called for it, she fought hard. And despite being born a slave, Mary lived to become one of the freest souls to ever draw a breath, or a .38 revolver. Join me today as we examine the life of Mary Fields, a woman who could whip any 2 men in Montana territory, a lady whose fondness for hard liquor was matched only by her capacity to put it away. Or at least that's according to a very famous actor who knew Stagecoach Mary personally. Ooh, who could it be? Stick around and find out. My name's Josh, and this is the Wild West Extravaganza. Mary Fields was born a slave, sometime around the year 1832, on a plantation in Hickman County, Tennessee. Maybe. As tends to be the case, especially with former slaves, there's just not a lot of information out there regarding Mary's early life. Some sources claim that her mother worked in the big house, while her father labored in the fields. Others say she was born in Florida and sold to the Warner family out of West Virginia. Whatever the case, we do know that by 1870, Mary had gained her freedom and was working as a chambermaid on a steamboat ironically called the Robert E. Lee. In fact, she was even on board for the historic race between the Lee and the steamboat Natchez. Mary would fondly recall how they threw pretty much everything they could find in the fire just to produce enough steam to make it to the finish line, even entire sides of ham. And apparently it worked, as the Lee beat the Natchez by a solid 6.5 hours. No word on how many chamber pots Mary emptied during the race, but something tells me she had one hell of a celebration on deck later that night. As you'll soon learn, Mary Fields did enjoy having a good time. Now, her next job was up in Toledo, Ohio, but once again, it's not exactly clear how she wound up there. Legend has it that she met Judge Edmund Dunn aboard the Robert E. Lee, and he was so impressed by her work ethic that he hired her right there on the spot. Then again, there are other stories asserting that Mary was owned by the judge's in-laws, the Warner family, prior to emancipation. Either way, Mary would become fast friends with the judge's sister, Sarah, who, as it turns out, was a Roman Catholic nun, an Ursuline nun, to be exact. Now, I had never heard of that before, Ursuline, but according to Encyclopedia Britannica, it's a Roman Catholic religious order of women founded in 1535 and dedicated exclusively to the education of girls. And yeah, it wasn't long before Mary Fields began living and working at the convent, right alongside her new friend Sarah. Not as a nun, but more of a hired hand. A job she did not take lightly, by the way. Part of her duties entailed tending to the garden and a courtyard. And you better believe she did not put up with anyone trampling her daggum grass. Or as one of the nuns put it, God help anyone who walked on the lawn after Mary had cut it. Now, I'm not exactly sure when Mary began working at the convent, but she would stay there until the 1880s. That's when Bishop John Bondell reached out to the Ursulines looking for a little assistance. The Jesuit missionaries out in Montana had spent the last 2 decades running relief stations and missions for the local indigenous, namely the Blackfeet. And now they were hoping that the nuns could open up a boarding school. As such, Mary's friend Sarah, who by that point was going by the name Mother Amadeus, packed her bags and headed west. Now, me personally, I have not yet had the pleasure of visiting Montana, but I hear it can get just a wee bit chilly in the wintertime. And it was those frigid temperatures that damn near put Mother Amadeus under. She ended up coming down with a pretty serious case of pneumonia, and when word made it back to Toledo, Mary caught a train and rushed to her side. Per historian Meante M. McConnell, quote, Mother Amadeus would not leave these girls. The pioneer nuns had run out of food and money. Their sole source of heat, an iron stove, would not alleviate frostbit limbs without fuel. Following school lessons taught during the day, the undernourished sisters and their indigenous pupils slept on the frozen earth floor. And Mary Fields would too. She had decided to stay. End of quote. And yeah, not only would Mary stay, but she also began working to improve conditions there at the mission, which, by the way, was located about 10 or so miles west of Cascade, Montana. And when I say work, I'm talking grown man work, okay? Mary Fields literally did it all. She hunted and trapped for food, she cut and hauled firewood, she raised chickens, did laundry, tended to the garden. She even helped prepare the altar for Mass. You name it, Mary did it. And just an FYI, but if you think Montana is white nowadays, back in the mid-1880s, it was really white. I'm talking going to Weezer concerts, and eating nothing but egg salad sandwiches white. You gotta think, back in those days, Montana had a population of less than 100,000. And out of all those people, only a few hundred of them were black. That being the case, it did take a while for the locals to warm up to Mary. Even the Jesuits didn't know what to make of her, at least not at first. That said, in all fairness, I'm not really sure how much of that had to do with Mary's skin tone, as opposed to her somewhat unconventional behavior. Remember what I said earlier about Mary liking to have a good time. She may have bunked with a passel of nuns, but she still cursed like a sailor, smoked cigars, and drank whiskey by the gallon. She also didn't take no shit, especially from men, an attitude that would lead to more than a few altercations, both verbal and physical. Like the time she got into a fist fight with a cowboy, or when she and another hired hand there at the mission got into an actual gunfight. Or at least that's how the story goes. Unfortunately, the details have been lost to history, so much so that we don't even know for sure if the gunfight truly occurred. Some say that pistols were drawn, and bullets did indeed start flying, but nobody was hurt. Others say that Mary and the unnamed man simply touched rifles and exchanged a few not-so-pleasant pleasantries. Like I said, the details are unknown, but whatever went down would cause Mary to lose her job there at the mission. Remember, they were trying to teach young girls the finer points of Victorian etiquette, and I guess pistol duels weren't exactly part of the curriculum. Bishop Bondell had already heard stories concerning Mary's other proclivities, the cursing and the drinking, so I guess he had finally had enough and gave her the boot. The nuns there at the mission were heartbroken, to say the least, and for good reason. Mary had spent the last decade completely devoted to the Ursuline sisters, only to be unceremoniously thrown to the curb. Luckily for Fields, Mother Amadeus was able to set her up with a restaurant in nearby Cascade. Only problem was, despite Mary's rough exterior, her heart was just as big as that Montana sky. Or to paraphrase the great Chris Knight, sometimes the hardest of edges can hide the tenderest of hearts. You see, Mary couldn't stand to see people go hungry, so she gave away more food than she charged for, especially to the struggling sheep herders. And after failing to turn a profit, the restaurant predictably went belly up. So Mother Amadeus stepped in yet again, helped Mary out with a second restaurant, but just like before, she couldn't stop giving away the food. That's when the nuns encouraged Mary to become a star route carrier for the U.S. Postal Service. Now, from what I understand, star route carriers were private contractors who bid on specific mail routes, especially in more rural or hard-to-reach areas. They were paid per trip and operated under the strict standards of celerity, certainty, and security. In other words, be fast, be reliable, and pretty please do not lose the GD mail. Mary had to prove that she could hitch a 6-horse team as part of the interview. Not only did she succeed, but she was also faster than the men applying for the job. And that being the case, Mary Fields became the second woman in all of history and the very first black woman to ever work as a star route carrier. Now, there's a lot of questionable information floating around out there, especially online, but one of the best biographies I was able to locate on Mary came from Ebony magazine, way back in 1959, courtesy of Gary Cooper. Yeah, that Gary Cooper, the guy from High Noon and Sergeant York. Turns out Cooper was born in Helena and spent a lot of time over in Cascade when he was a child. He personally knew Mary and had many a fond memory. It was Cooper I was quoting earlier when I said that Mary could whip any 2 men in the territory, and that she had a fondness for hard liquor that was matched only by her capacity to put it away. Quote, "They gave Mary the route between Cascade and the mission itself, and every day, never missing a one, she made her triumphant entry into the mission seated atop a mail coach, dressed in a man's hat and coat and smoking a huge cigar. Mary met every train and oftentimes slept in the depot. In bad weather, if Mary's coach could not get through, she would shoulder the luggage and walk. She drove the route for 8 years." End of quote. Worth noting that Mary never did drive an actual stagecoach, despite her nickname. In all reality, it was a mail coach, sort of like a buggy. I'm not really sure when or why people took to calling her Stagecoach Mary, but Gary Cooper knew her as Black Mary. Other locals would talk of how she kept a jug of whiskey there at her feet when driving the coach, and that she was always heavily armed. They say Mary kept a .38 revolver belted around her waist, and either a rifle or a 10-gauge shotgun close at hands at all times, causing the road agents to keep a wide berth. And then there's the way she dressed, which we've already kind of sort of touched on. Apparently, Mary's uniform of choice was a skirt, skull cap, and a man's heavy overcoat, along with a ever-present cigar clenched between her teeth. Thus provisioned, Mary set out alone across the prairie, no matter the conditions. According to historian William Katz, quote, "One night while hauling freight to St. Peter's, wolves attacked her wagon. The horses bolted, wagons, supplies, and a surprised Mary Fields landed on a Montana prairie. It was a lonely and fearful night, but with a rifle and pistol, along with an iron determination not to fall asleep, Mary Fields kept the wolves at bay." Another time, during a bitter winter, she was driving her wagon from Cascade to the Mission. A light snowfall turned to a blizzard, whipped by strong winds. It was no use going forward, for it was not possible to see more than a few feet. Mary Fields got down from the wagon and waited out the storm, walking back and forth all night to keep from freezing. End of quote. So yeah, very tough lady, right? But here's the thing. Mary didn't get that job with the Postal Service until she was in her 60s, and she continued doing it for damn near the next decade. Finally, in 1903, Mother Amadeus was called to Alaska for missionary work, sadly leaving her friend Mary behind. Of course, by that point, Mary was getting a little too long in the tooth to be taken on new frontiers. So it were, at over 70 years of age, Stagecoach Mary finally retired. Kind of. I guess I should say she retired from driving the coach, but she did not stop working. She simply settled down full-time there in Cascade and began operating a laundry out of her house. And this semi-retirement aside, Mary was just as wild as ever. There's even stories of her betting men that she could knock them out in one punch. And legend has it, Mary never lost a bet. Then there's the time one of her customers tried to make off with his laundry without paying for it. Mary caught up with him, tapped him on the shoulder, and just as soon as he turned around, she belted him in the mouth. She then marched to the nearest saloon, ordered a drink, and declared that the man's bill was now paid in full. Speaking of saloons, Mary was not technically allowed to drink there in Cascade, per a city ordinance. But eventually the mayor just passed a new law carving out a special exemption just for her. Guess maybe he didn't want to get punched in the face as well. Now, believe it or not, between all that fighting and drinking, Mary also became the town's designated babysitter. By all accounts, the children loved her, and she doted on them as if they were her own. Even the mayor's son would later recall that Mary was, quote, "gentle and loving. She held me in her lap and sang to me with a deep voice. She was a second mother to all of us kids." And one thing that I thought was very amusing was that Mary would randomly throw birthday celebrations for herself, despite not actually knowing her own birthday. Basically whenever the mood struck, sometimes multiple times per year. Just whenever she felt like it, she would declare that it was her birthday. And really, this was just another opportunity for her to hand out candy to the children. How the schools and even some of the businesses would close early just to celebrate Mary's mini birthdays. She was also a huge baseball fan. Not only was she the mascot for the local team, but she would also bring bouquets of flowers to hand out to the players. Just to give you an idea of how beloved Mary truly was, when her house burned down in 1912, the townsfolk all pitched in and built her a new one. The owner of the Cascade Hotel even provided all of Mary's meals free of charge. You don't do that for someone who's not highly respected. And I do think over time, Mary Fields had more than earned her place there amongst the pioneers of Cascade. Eventually, though, the years did start to catch up to her, as tends to happen to us all, right? Mary's health began to fail, and she ended up spending the last month of her life in bed. Finally, one cold December night, she took her blankets outside and laid down in the grass, ready to meet her end under that Montana sky that she had grown to love. Luck would have it, though, some young boys found her and fetched their parents. They were able to rush Mary to the hospital over at Great Falls, where all comfort was given, but by that point, it was just too late. It was there at the hospital on December 5th, 1914, at around the age of 82, that Stagecoach Mary crossed that River Jordan. I forgot to mention it, but Mother Amadeus had passed away a couple months prior, so I can't help but wonder if Mary was just ready to join her old friend on the other side. As it were, her funeral was reportedly the largest the Cascade had ever seen. A priest from St. Peter's delivered mass, and several of the town's leading citizens served as pallbearers. If you're ever looking to pay your respects, you can find Mary still resting at Cascade's Hillside Cemetery. What a life, man. And by the way, if Stagecoach Mary sounds familiar, she has been portrayed by a lot of people throughout the years. The very talented Zazie Beetz in the Netflix original The Harder They Fall. Whoopi Goldberg played her in the movie Outlaw Posse. Esther Roll, Amber Sharday Robinson, Dawn Lewis, and Kimberly Elise have all portrayed Mary. Hell, there's even a children's book, a screenplay, and even a damn asteroid named in Mary's honor. Now, if you'd like to learn more, my buddy Zarin has an excellent episode devoted to Mary on his Black Cowboys podcast. It really is an amazing episode, and I personally really enjoyed hearing the input from Zarin's father, especially the story about the Underground Railroad. Finally, just to wrap things up, there's an article I found on montanaswomenhistory.org that I think does a pretty good job of summing up Mary Fields. My apologies to the author, I was not able to find a name, but the article reads as follows. As the sole African American in Cascade, Fields did not have the benefit of a close-knit black community, such as developed in towns like Helena, Great Falls, Butte, and Fort Benton. And because she was outside the boundaries of respectable womanhood, Fields was in some ways on her own. It is hard to imagine Fields did not feel the sting of prejudice, or at least the friendly contempt described by African-American musician W.C. Handy on a visit to Helena in 1897. Nevertheless, she certainly lived an inspirational life, and one forged on her own terms. She was, in the best sense, a pioneer woman. She was rough and she was tough. And as Gary Cooper opined, she was born a slave but lived to become one of the freest souls ever to draw a breath. End of quote, and there you have it. Stagecoach Mary definitely lived life on her own terms. I guess after spending the first third of her life in chains, Mary refused to be bound by societal norms. She fought, she drank, she cursed, and she toted iron. But through it all, she remained tender enough to cradle Cascade's children and to feed those who weren't able to feed themselves. A legend loved in life and remembered long after her death. The kind of story that the West was made for. And that's about all I've got on Stagecoach Mary. Big thanks to Eve Uribe for helping to research and write today's episode. And thank you for joining me. I know it was a short episode today, but it has been a very hectic couple of weeks. To be perfectly honest, it's been a very hectic year. Got a lot on my plate now, just trying to juggle this show and family obligations while at the same time trying to write a book. And I've also been working out a lot of the technical bugs, or trying to at least. I've had a lot of people reaching out lately, letting me know that there's some type of static or background noise in recent episodes. I'm not exactly sure what's causing it. I take that back. I think I do know what's causing it. I think I've got it fixed right now. Fingers crossed. So if you hear any type of static today, please hit me up at josh@wildwestextra.com, and I will continue troubleshooting. Also, if things go as planned, I will be going live on YouTube at some point in the very near future. Look, if you haven't figured it out already, I am very bad with this whole technology thing. I'm getting to the point where I think I might actually have to hire someone to literally come to my house and set everything up. But we are going to make it happen one way or the other. And by the way, when I do go live, it'll be on Patreon first. Just tossing that out there. All right, and I guess that's about all I've got. Stay tuned, as I will be uploading an episode on Clay Allison very soon. I'm also working on a Porter Rockwell script and another one on the Lost Dutchman's Mind. A lot of people have requested that one. And then hopefully, once again, fingers crossed, we're going to dive headfirst into the Dakota War of 1862, followed by Red Cloud's War, the Fetterman Fight, the Battle of Little Bighorn, and eventually Wounded Knee. So yeah, we got a lot of stuff in the works. You know how it goes. These things just take time. Every now and then we're going to have a shorter episode, and you never know, might even have a week off in between there just to catch up on the scripts. All right, till next week, be nice and adios.